Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Baltimore County Alumni Chapter Voter Education Forum. We are here today at Falls Road AME Church by the invitation of Reverend Dr. Marlene R. Mitchell, who is the pastor. So we want to thank her for allowing us the opportunity to come and present today's Voter Education Forum. Any music, audio, or visual files, including but not limited to visual files created by third-party content creators that may play, are not synced or otherwise affixed to this and any other visual presentation during this Baltimore County chapter event. Attendees via continued participation and remaining logged in during this presentation acknowledge and agree to abide by and comply with any and all participation rules as applicable and specified during relevant sections of this event, and further acknowledge, understand, and agree that violation of such rules shall result in legal recourses and disciplinary action. Welcome to our Baltimore County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated public event. We are delighted that you chose to be with us today. We want you to have a wonderful experience. Please be assured that your safety as well as your enjoyment of this event are of utmost concern. Please take a moment, look around, and identify the nearest two exits, whether in a virtual setting at your home or physically in some formal venue. We must always be Delta ready. So please identify two exits at your current location in the event it is necessary to evacuate quickly and orderly in case of the need for an emergency evacuation. Also, during this COVID-19 pandemic, please remember to wear your mask, wash your hands, and always walk and stand 6 feet apart. Please enjoy this event and continue to be safe. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good. It's so great to see everyone. So good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today for our Voter Education Forum. I'm Lisa D'Agneto, President of the Baltimore County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And on behalf of our chapter, I bring you all greetings and thanks as we begin this incredible event. I would first like to thank our gracious host, Reverend Dr. Marlene R. Mitchell, for having us today in this wonderful establishment at the Falls Road AME Church. Thank you for sharing this space with us. And thank you to the Honorable Stephanie Madden-Smith, State Delegate for the 45th Legislative District, for being with us today to share your expertise and serving as moderator for the program. Thank you as well to the BCAC Social Action Committee, led by Soar Settles, Soar Park Saunders, and Soar Wallace. We are very excited to receive the knowledge that you will all pour into us today, and we appreciate all the hard work that went into putting this event together for the benefit of the community at large. Delta Sigma Theta has been on the front lines with fortitude for more than 100 years, and Baltimore County Alumni Chapter has been doing its fight in Baltimore County for 40 years, coming up this December, driving local change and making sure that the community has equal rights and representation. We all understand the criticality of our civic duty to vote, but just not to vote. We need to own our power to be an educated voter. So many before us have fought and even died for equal rights in voting, so we should always reflect on that, but also maximize our power to ensure that we have our say in all levels of voting and choice. So please enjoy the Voter Education Forum this morning. Please stay engaged in the content and discussion, whether here or virtually. Ask questions and share what you have learned today with as many as you can. Thank you again and enjoy the program.
Thank you, President Denyacho. So Voter Education Forum, we saw the need, and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is the 501c7 organization, has given a charge to us as members of this organization, and that is to engage in election education, election engagement, which includes voter registration, voter education, voter mobilization, and voter protection. And so today we're going to emphasize our focus on voter education. And today, as you have already heard, we have the pleasure of having the Honorable Stephanie Madden Smith. She is not only a state delegate representing the 45th Legislative District, but she also, since 2020, has led the Baltimore City delegation in the Maryland General Assembly. And she thought it not robbery to come today and to lend her information, support her wisdom about how government works. She is a mother, she is a wife, she is very active in the community, and she brings all of that to bear when she sits and helps to develop policy. And so we are very thankful to have her here today to be able to help us through this discussion. So who are we and why are we here? Well, if we're over the age of 18, we are certainly in a position to cast a vote and make a difference, not only in who might be elected president, but also on those issues that affect our daily lives. Why are we here? To gain more information so that we can become informed voters. We don't want to just show up at the poll and guess what we're going to do. We want to think through beforehand. We want to take actions beforehand so that once we get to the ballot, we're able to make intelligent decisions about not only who our elected officials will be, but also deciding those issues that will impact our personal lives. So the rules for today are this. Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is a nonpartisan organization. And what that means is we do not endorse candidates. We do not endorse platforms. We provide information in a nonpartisan manner. And so if you have any questions or thoughts or concerns, please make sure you are having that in the back of your mind. If you have a question, feel free to ask, but please refrain from asking, well, should I vote for this candidate? Should I vote for this issue? What are your thoughts about this or that? That is not something that Delta Sigma Theta can speak on. There's certainly many opportunities for individual people to make choices and have those kinds of conversations. But for the purpose of today's presentation, we want to make sure we are maintaining neutrality. And so we are going to define voter election or voter education, voter engagement. We're going to discuss the importance of voter engagement, and ultimately we want everyone who leaves this presentation to have a voter education or a voting plan. And with that, does anybody have any idea what voter engagement is? Can anybody tell us what that might be? Okay, and for the benefit of we're being streamed as well as here in this setting. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind just summarizing what you just said, I'm gonna have someone pass a mic to you if you don't mind. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Good morning. My
Morning.
name is Gwendolyn Jones, and I'm soror from Alumnae Zeta chapter, and I do appreciate having the opportunity to come to your voter engagement activity. But voter engagement has to do with participating, not only being able to go into the schools and having young students register to vote, It also involves watching your debates so you can have an educational decision on who to vote for, and just being active, not idle, being actively involved with voting.
I have. Does that also include? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Would that also include participation in the voting process, as far as being a judge or a poll watcher, things of that nature?
It definitely does, and there will be a portion where we'll talk about some of those opportunities as well, but you're absolutely right.
Excellent, excellent. Anyone else?
Anyone else?
I was voluntold to do that.
And we appreciate you.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
We appreciate that.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Comment?
Okay, can you just can you take the mic from him? Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. And again, as you can see, this is going to be interactive. So thank you so much for your thoughts. So we have lots of ground to cover, and we're going to just keep moving. And so we're going to take a pulse on this whole concept of voter engagement. I'm going to ask make a couple of true-false statements, and I want you all to think about what's being asked.
Good morning. My name is Octavia Park Saunders, and I am the Social Action Co-Chair, so good morning to everyone. We're just going to ask a few questions, and I want you guys to really think about it. We won't ask you to use the mic, but I really want everyone to think about these questions, and they will be answered as we go through this program. So, voting for the United States President, that will have the most significant impact on my daily life. Okay, all right. Keep that in the back of your mind. Voting down ballot, which means voting the entire ballot, is not important. Okay. Voting for everything on the ballot is not required. You guys might know a little something, okay. Mail-in ballots are as effective as in-person ballots. All right.
Can you go back one?
I must be 18 years old to register to vote. Okay.
So we have a very knowledgeable group here today. And again, as Ms. Parks Saunders has said, we're going to cover this information as we move through the presentation.
Yes, okay. Y'all gonna teach us something today. Okay, next slide. So we're gonna think about some things. Today is not only interactive, we also want everyone to think. We want you all to leave enabled and ready to go out into your communities and give information that people just may not know. So the question we're gonna ask right now is, does my or your vote count? A lot of people are asking that, and we can see on the news in different ways where people are kind of feeling like maybe it doesn't. But we want to assure you on today that your vote, each and every individual vote, does in fact count. So we're going to play a video so you can watch the screens, and we'll come back and discuss.
Few years. Voting is personal. It's your voice. It's the power you hold to shape your world, your community, and your future. Let's break it down. When you vote, you're making choices about the things that really matter to you, like the quality of your local schools, the safety of your roads, or how your community invests in healthcare. Think about it. The laws, the leaders, and the policies that impact your daily life all start with your vote. But here's the thing. When you don't vote, you're still making a choice. You're choosing to let other people decide what happens in your community, your state, and even your country. You might think, my one vote doesn't really matter. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Imagine this, thousands of people thinking the same way as you. If all those voices go unheard, then decisions get made without you in mind. That's the reality. Let's get specific. Think about the things you care about: your job, your kids' education, affordable healthcare, even simple things like whether the streetlights in your neighborhood work. These are real everyday issues that are impacted by local, state, and national policies. And these policies? They're created by the people we vote into office. When you skip voting, you're leaving the decisions that affect your life to others who might not understand your struggles, your goals, or your dreams. And honestly, those in power are counting on people to not show up. The fewer people who vote, the easier it is for them to keep things the way they are, or to make changes that might not benefit you. That's why it's so important for your voice to be heard. Let me give you an example. Imagine there's a proposal to build a new park in your town, or maybe a policy that affects how much funding your local schools get. These decisions directly impact you and your family. Wouldn't you want a say in that? Of course you would. That's the power of your vote. It's the tool that puts you in control. And you don't have to be a political expert to vote. You just have to care about your future. It's about making sure your voice, your needs, and your values are part of the conversation. Whether it's a local election or a national one, every vote is a step toward building the future you want to see. So let's stop thinking of voting as something small or insignificant. It's not. Your vote is your chance to say, this is what matters to me. This is what I believe in. Every time you vote, you're helping to shape policies that affect your paycheck, your safety, your health, and so much more. So don't sit this one out. Voting isn't just a right, it's a responsibility. Your voice matters. Your vote matters. Let's make it count. See you at the polls.
Okay, so I'm glad we had that video, and hopefully if you don't get anything else from this presentation today, is that you leave here knowing and understanding that your vote is your voice. And so if you're silent in speaking and you're silent at the polls, then you are silent in what you want to see in your community at large, in your country. So your vote is your voice. And so if there's something that you like, don't like, you want to see, don't want to see, this is the time. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but let's get this message out to our family members, our church members, our communities, all those people that we serve, anyone that is undecided. Let them know that their vote is their voice. So we're going to get ready and prepare to vote today. And these are some things that you have a comment? 1 second, let me get the mic to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just think that's an excellent question about, do you think your vote counts? Because while we're out in the community trying to register our young people, that is a great response that we're getting from a lot of them. They really do not believe that their vote counts, and they totally do not understand the electoral college, that piece. And so this is a critical question, and just wanting to learn ways to really motivate them and encourage them to go out and vote, because it's one too many that have that thought.
We certainly agree, and hopefully something will be said today. I'm sure there will be something said today that will give us maybe talking points or encouragement or embolden us to tell them that their vote indeed does count. And unfortunately, as we know, social media does direct a lot of what they're hearing, but there's not a lot of truth in it. So we're trying to empower ourselves today to get truth that we can go and speak it to power out in our communities. Thank you for your comment.
And even if we have been active in the process here or there, we need to make sure that our information is current, right? So you don't have to raise your hand, but I want you all to think about the following. Are you registered to vote? Seems like a simple question. Sometimes we take it for granted. If we registered a while ago, or perhaps we registered one place and moved somewhere else, we need to make sure. And with so many things happening in this political landscape, we need to not just guess, but we need to ensure that we are, in fact, registered to vote. What is your legislative district? Who are your representatives? They are not necessarily going to be the same people that were in place just 2 years ago. We all need to make sure we are taking the time and taking a look and making sure we are up to speed on what is current.
Also, who are your representatives? Okay, in this instance, we all live in Baltimore County, but do we all have the same representatives? So you might think that, well, my sister over, 2 streets is voting for this person, I guess I'm gonna vote for them too, but is that your representative? That's something that you would need to know. That's who you need to know if my street lights aren't working or what things are going on locally. Those are the people that you're mad at, not the president, not anybody else. Those are the people that you should be mad at, and that's who should know your voice, right? What positions are on the ballot? A lot of times we hear all of the noise, and rightfully so, about the president. But on this, there are other issues that affect our community. Because I know one thing, I'm tired of the lottery. You know what I mean? There are things that they say the lottery goes to the schools. Well, where is it? But this is where we're voting to see where we want the money to go.
And also, if I can just add on to that, some people are not familiar with how judges' names get placed on ballot. So I'm just going to take a moment. I don't know if I introduced myself earlier or not, but I'm Lisa Settles. I actually am a licensed attorney in Maryland and have been for a number of years and have been very actively involved in the judicial selection process, meaning that it's more than just having a name. So many of you all who have voted before, you've seen the name, should this person continue in this position? But do people really know how those judges got on the ballot? So I'm just going to take a moment and explain it from my understanding, having been involved in that process. Judges have to meet certain criteria. They have to be of a certain age. They had to have been practicing law for a certain number of years. But there's an entire judicial selection process that goes on in order for someone to be appointed as a judge in Maryland. So really briefly, what happens is whoever is the sitting governor has the opportunity when there is a vacancy on either the district court, and I'm speaking specifically about Maryland, if there's someone on a district court or on a circuit court in Maryland where there's a vacancy, whoever is the sitting governor has the opportunity to appoint that person. That person doesn't come to the governor's attention until they go through an entire process. So there's a process where there's an application they have to fill out, and it's very intrusive. You have to give information about your personal life, your professional life, the number of cases that you've tried, the type of law that you've practiced, and then you meet with lots of different specialty bar associations like the Women's Bar Association or the Asian Pacific Bar Association. There's a number of different steps you go through, and then ultimately, as a candidate for a judicial vacancy, you meet with what's called the Judicial Nominating Commission. That is a commission of both attorneys as well as laypersons that are appointed by the governor. In Baltimore County, as an example, there are approximately 17 people who sit on the Judicial Nominating Commission. It is their job to look at all those people who've applied, all the application materials for those who've applied. They interview that person, and they determine whether or not this person meets the qualifications and should be considered by the governor to be appointed. At the end of their process, they come up with what is often called the short list. From that short list, the governor then interviews each of the candidates. And from those candidates, the governor can make an appointment. A lot of people don't know that. And so when you're going to the polls and you see the names of people that are judges, they have gone through what I've just described as a vetting process. So you can be assured that they are qualified to hold those positions. But again, do your homework. If you are aware of a case that a judge that's on that ballot has decided and you disagree with it, you have every right and opportunity to not support them if that's what you choose to do. But a lot of people don't know those types of things. So we're providing this forum so that we can give you all additional information. So that's a lot more than you probably knew walking in the door, but there's a whole process behind that. And you never see the advertisements, or rarely see advertisements for judges. So just bear that in mind. There's a lot on the ballot. It's a lot more than just who's at the top of the ticket.
And that goes to why voting for governor. Sometimes we vote for governor because we see what they say on commercials, but they have other things that they can elect, that they can appoint. And if you don't agree with their views, you can almost assure yourself that they're going to align themselves probably with people who align themselves with them. So if you don't agree, it's more at stake. So we're trying to get a whole totality of seeing the big picture of who we're voting for, and that we're not going into the ballots just checking names of who we've seen on TV, who's more popular, to actually understand and know what their positions are. We're going to take 2 comments.
So what I hear you saying is that it's important for us to do our due diligence, right?
100%.
And to check out the track record of each person on the ballot. I think it's important, one of the takeaways that I hear right now is that our inaction is also an action.
An action.
Because in not doing our due diligence, in not getting out to vote, things stay the same, right? That's what I'm hearing.
That's correct. I see you, but I'm going to go here. We haven't heard from her yet, and then we can circle back if we don't get to it.
I think what I heard is that government, local, is most important to your issues, our issues, if we live locally, because locally determines, as it was so eloquently stated, everything that we have a concern about: water, schools, judges. So we have to think local first, then regional, then national. So local is very, very important.
I definitely agree. And I mean, just for the sake of argument, we'll say they're all important. But I will say for day-to-day life and the things that affect us on the day-to-day, 100% local. We should definitely, and a lot of times we put most of our importance on, per se, the presidential election, because that's what we hear about the most. That's where all the traction and the news and the headlines are. But day-to-day, local elections are important, and our moderator will go through that, and we'll leave knowing at least who's on the ballot. And then once you leave, we're going to charge you to look and see what each person is, what their platforms are.
So let me just ask this question of you all. Have you ever been to the polls and looked at a ballot question and it asked whether or not you support funding $1 million for clean water? By show of hands or head nods, have you all ever seen? But before you got to the polling place, had you even considered that? Have you even, and if you decide, yes, you want to support this, well, what does that mean? Does anybody ever think about, well, at some point, that money might have to be repaid? And in fact, it will have to be repaid. So in voting yes, understand that there are tax implications that go along with that. Not to suggest that you shouldn't support it, but just understand that it's more than just being in that moment. Whatever you decide in that moment, it will have an effect down the road. So think about that as you are deciding whether to support a ballot measure, particularly as it requests monies. Bond issues is what we often hear it referred to as.
So I'm going to ask, I know everyone has a phone. I'm going to ask that everyone scan the QR codes. This QR code is going to take you to, I believe, Vote 411, which is a nonpartisan platform. And it's going to ask you, I think, maybe 3 or 4 questions. It's going to ask you name, zip code. I think that's it, name and zip code. And I want you all to share this. Even if you can't share the QR code when you leave here, share the website. Because you can take this while you're walking in a grocery store, while you're standing in line. Just ask someone, hey, are you registered to vote? Not who are you going to vote for, are you registered to vote? And you can tell them, there's a place where you can make sure your polling place hasn't changed. There's a wealth of information here at this site, and it takes maybe all of 3 minutes or less to enter the information. So I'm going to give everyone a chance. Can everyone is everybody able to get and scan the QR code? if you need, there's one in the back if that's closer and your camera needs.
And as you all are doing that, I'm just going to highlight what's on here. I pulled up the QR code myself. There is personalized voting information that you can gather by using the QR code. You'll be able to see what's on your ballot, check your voter registration status, find your polling place, discover upcoming debates in your area, and so much more. So it's asking that you enter your street address, state, and zip code. And once you submit that, it should take you to be able to find that information that was just described.
And what's good about this, it's your personalized information. So it's your zip code. It tells everything that will be on your ballot when you go to the polls. So it's not going to have, I know there's so much information when you watch the news or read the newspapers. There's so much information. This is personalized to you. So all of your candidates, all of your ballot measures, everything that is germane and important and specific to you would be on this.
And another thing you all can, you don't have to do it now, but as you take a look at what is in this QR code, it also gives you information about how you personally can make a voter plan. There's also information about if you encounter election day problems. There are phone numbers that you can access. So voter protection, as I mentioned, is one of the 4 pillars that Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated is focused on. Voter protection, you want to make sure, okay, you've registered to vote, you show up at the polling place, but what happens if the polls don't open on time? That's an issue that needs to be addressed. And so the app, the QR code takes you and provides information in terms of what you can do if you encounter those types of problems.
I just had a thought and I lost it. But yeah, so this QR code does provide a wealth of information specific to you. We can go to the next. So we're going to hand it over to our lovely moderator today, State Delegate Stephanie Madden Smith.
Thank you. Give them a clap. You did great. Well, good morning, good morning. I am just delighted to be here with all of you and also those that are in streaming land with us. Again, I'm Stephanie Smith. I represent the 45th District, which is East Baltimore, Northeast Baltimore City, but I do share some neighborhoods with Baltimore County. Overley, Parkville, some areas you may be familiar with are in part in both jurisdictions, and I formerly lived in Baltimore County. I've actually lived in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, even Cecil County, and here in Baltimore City now. So, one Maryland. And so I want to start by first just thanking you for allowing us to be in your space. Thank you to Madam President, all officers, and those members who are here today in the community at large, because you could have been anywhere, but you've chosen to be here, not only to become further informed, but also to prepare yourselves to go out back in the community and ensure our neighbors and friends and family members are ready. And yesterday I was at an event where current Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks mentioned that a rabbi had said, neighbor is not a geographic phrase, it's about your values. So we're here as neighbors, whether we live next door to each other or across town, our values are about supporting democracy and ensuring that people are participatory. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to first start off by, I'm Stephanie Smith. My mother is Kathleen Madden. My grandmother is Lillian Hill, and my great-grandmother was Hattie. And the reason why I mention them is that they are the sum of who I am before you, and I know that you have names that you can recall, some that you met, some that you didn't get a chance to meet. But my great-grandmother Hattie, born in 1890, never got a chance to vote, right? And my grandmother, born in 1910, she paid poll taxes in Virginia, but she did indeed get an opportunity to vote in spite of that. And then my mother, in 1968, registered her father, who was age 65, believe it or not, he was a bit older when he had her, to vote for the very first time. And so I know what it means for people to never have imagined that they would have an opportunity to vote. I know what it means for people to have to navigate unfair laws and unjust laws just to vote. And I also know how exciting it was for my mother to work with her father to extend his access to the franchise for the first time in his life as an older adult, as someone that probably never thought he would have a chance to vote. And I think for us, we encounter people who might go, well, you're like, well, I know there's Hatties and Lillians and Daniels and people in my history. Why wouldn't you want to vote? It seems almost offensive, I think, to many people in this room when you hear that there are people in your community who do not want to vote. But I think that we have a responsibility here, and we're going to go through some of the nuts and bolts, not necessarily to vilify people for feeling bad for not feeling connected to voting. Democracy is, it's a contact sport, but it's also a team sport. And if certain team members are not as strong, then it's up to us to kind of pour into them to open their eyes. And I think oftentimes we have seen over the past decade or so that people sometimes, when they feel attacked, don't come closer to you. They get further entrenched in their standpoint. And so I want to, for your consideration, implore you to get to the why, not just say, oh, other people died for this. Oh, don't you know that in other parts of the world, people don't even get to vote that want to vote? I think we have to get to the why. And generally, when you ask, it's because they feel like their lives have not been fundamentally changed despite the fact that they hear a lot of conversation about it. And that's why what Octavia said was really important. They're expecting someone out of alignment with their powers to do things in their lives. So if they only care about the presidential election and they don't see movement in their community or they don't see movement in their school, they're connecting it to a conversation that is almost 100% about a person that doesn't have jurisdiction over their everyday concerns. So I think the education opportunity there is more important than indicting them or condemning them for feeling disconnected from voting. Another thing that I think from a behavioral psychology, people really respond to feeling like someone's taking something from them. Very often when you prevent calamity, people don't really connect to that because they didn't feel the harm. But when you grab them out of the pit, they remember that. And so I think that's something to remind people is that if voting didn't matter, why do people work so hard to make it difficult for you to do that? Like if it doesn't matter, then why are people making decisions that could really make it hard or impossible for people to do that? Why, if it doesn't matter, why do we, in many instances, make it difficult or impossible, depending where you live, for someone with certain criminal records to vote? If it doesn't matter, why are there so much effort around denying access to the ballot? And I generally see people react more to the thought that someone's trying to take something from them than necessarily, remember someone 100 years ago you never met, didn't get to vote? Sometimes that's not what's going to connect with them. So let's jump into some of the important dates around voting here in Maryland. As you know, the deadline, if you're going to apply online, is October 15th. And this is a really great opportunity because as long as you have a Maryland-issued identification, whether that's your driver's license or just a traditional ID card, if you have a Maryland-issued identification, you can apply online by October 15th. And in-person applications would have to be submitted, and that could be at your county elections office rather, by November 4th. Now, mail-in applications, I don't know who's doing that, but someone might be doing that. Someone might be mailing in an application to vote. That deadline requires it to be postmarked October 15th. So October 15th is really a very important deadline for either online submissions for your application to vote, to register to vote rather, and then for your mail-in, it must be postmarked. Now this is so important because every state does not have this. Let's say you miss October 15th. Let's say you're just one of those, procrastinators. You just get a little to the line before you start doing things. On Election Day on November 5th, you can go into your appropriate precinct and you can just register to vote right there. And so there is a last chance opportunity for you to register and execute your vote on that same date. Now, we do have a process for requesting absentee ballots, which is important, but I want to remind people you do have an early voting period right before. So sometimes I think people feel like if they're not accustomed to early voting, that you don't necessarily have to request an absentee ballot if you're in fact going to be in town in the lead up in the early voting period. But should you be just out of pocket that entire time. You can request an absentee ballot, and those requests must be made either in person by November 4th, or if you're going to make that request by mail-in, it must happen by October 28th. Excuse me. So for voting, mail-in ballots must be postmarked by November 5th. Now, something to remember is that we do have drop boxes available across the state, generally at not only the Board of Elections, but other sites across the county. That's another alternative as well to dropping your ballot in the mail. Early voting, as I mentioned earlier, is going to go from October 24th through 31st. Could be festive on the 31st, but perhaps at the at the early voting, maybe people might be wearing some attire, different attire that day. And then, of course, Election Day is November 5th. Next slide. So we began this conversation about what is voter engagement and election engagement. Election engagement is educating voters, which is what's happening here today, about just the general approaches. Election engagement can also, with other organizations, be partisan. Election engagement could also simply just be a voter registration drive to ensure that people do, in fact, become voters. And so I know that your organization nationally and also at the chapter level is involved in a lot of these activities, not only in community, but also in campus communities as well. And so I think what Lisa mentioned earlier about planning for your kind of election experience, knowing where you're going to vote is important. Knowing that your registration is valid based on where you live currently. I know that are many people that sometimes don't realize that even if they haven't moved, their precinct has moved and show up at the wrong place on election day. So checking all of these things are really important. Now, I was working for a campaign in 2016 in Pennsylvania. And I remember that I was really focused because at that time, Pennsylvania did not have early voting. Really big state. I have to make sure that anyone that endeavors to vote gets that vote within the 12 hours. And this person was coming from after work. You could tell they worked in the medical profession because they had their smock on. And they came up to the polling place and they told her, "You're not supposed to vote here." She's like, "I've been voting here for years. Why not?" And so I was a little bit under the gun because she needed to get to Buffalo Wild Wings before they ran out of, I guess it was unlimited wings before 8 p.m. And so she was like, "Miss Ma'am, I need to get this over with because So I begged her to give me her cell number. I was like, "I'm gonna do some digging. We're gonna find out where you're really supposed to vote." And so I called her back and she was so relieved that I found out her polling place had changed. So she had not moved, but sometimes the actual polling place, that's something we don't discuss enough, can change. And then she also was excited to tell me that they extended the promotion to 11 p.m. So she was able to come back. And I was happy about that. And so, all of these things can matter because this person clearly worked all day, took the time to try to vote, and she was confronted with a barrier based on some information changing that she didn't know about. And if she was a little less, if she was going to be more easily dissuaded, that could have been enough for her to just go home and go, "I tried," right? And so I think we have to remember that even people who go as far as her can be dissuaded by challenges that come up. So the more we can be aware of, not only am I registered, is my polling place the same place it's usually been? Those are things that can create those hiccups from just turning someone all the way around. Next slide. So as I said before, first, you gotta make sure you've registered. If you haven't, you know the dates for Maryland. If you have friends and family in other states outside of Maryland, which I imagine most of us do, vote.org is another alternative website where people can check their status and their traditional information no matter what state they're in. And then we got to a conversation earlier about knowing what's on the ballot. So in addition to outposts like vote.org and you had Vote 411, the League of Women Voters, another great group of women, they have chapters across this country. They do provide county specific nonpartisan reviews of what's on the respective ballots. And then generally, if people wanted to avail themselves of filling out their questionnaire, they can share what their platforms are as candidates. So that's another nonpartisan resource that is state-specific and often county-specific, where they give summaries of ballot measures both at the state level and at the county level as well. And that's a great way just to kind of know who is on the ballot and what they stand for, and to kind of break down ballot measures that can be sometimes full of legalese, that can sometimes seem a little vague or challenging to understand. And most importantly, after you know where you're supposed to vote, you know how you're going to vote, you know that you're registered and everything's in order, now it's time to cast your ballot. And now you can do that with confidence because you are informed, you are empowered, and you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing. But I think something that people don't realize is you might not be able to take certain types of partisan promotional materials with you inside of the ballot, inside of the voting hall, but you generally can bring your own notes or sample ballots where you've written, notes about what you are intending to do with you, because you shouldn't feel pressured to recall everything, because sometimes these ballots can be particularly long from year to year. Not every year is it, but some years are longer than others. And so I think sample ballots are a great way to collect your thoughts in one place and be ready to go and not be stumped when you're standing there sometimes at an unfamiliar question. And it says encourage at least one friend or family, but I think you could do more than one. I think y'all can do, I don't know, 5, 20, 100. I mean, a lot of people. Look in your phone. How many of y'all have less than 500 people in your phone? I don't think you do. Oh, you have 499, ma'am. I saw you with your hand up. You might not have 500, but you have 499. I mean, most of you probably have 1,000 Facebook friends or more. I mean, you know people. And so I think a lot of times people feel like, oh, is this being intrusive? The type of information that we're discussing here, you're not telling people how to think, you're telling them how to be involved. And I think that is not something you should feel uncomfortable sharing on your social media platforms or texting. How many of y'all are in a family text group? Come on, y'all. It's not just swapping recipes in there, right? Y'all are doing some real stuff in there. And so, take an opportunity to use those text rings. These are people that expect to hear from you every day anyway, and they do. There's nothing wrong with sending a quick reminder. Is everyone in this text group ready to vote? You didn't tell them how to vote. You just asked, are they ready? Do they need any assistance? And also for some of our friends who may have physical infirmities and disabilities or older adults who do not drive, let's also ensure that if people do want to exercise their vote in person, if they need assistance getting there, I think it's good to just to say, hey, I'm willing to drive a few people. Sometimes people have pride and may not always want to ask for assistance. So if you are comfortable providing that assistance to people in your community or in your friend group or in your family chat chain, I think it's something that's under considered. There are some people that only want to vote in person and in certain instances are not able to physically do that for themselves. So if we can help them, I think we should. Next slide, please. So what's on the ballot? I mean, you guys know everything, so I'm sure you already know what's on the ballot, but we're going to go over it for those in Streamland who may not know. So as it was mentioned, this is a general election, no longer a primary. And of course, we are aware that there's a presidential election, but there are some additional positions, ballot questions, and other measures and issues on this ballot. So your vote is your voice. And your non-vote is also your voice. So I think a lot of times people say, I'm not a political person. It's almost like saying I don't breathe. Whether you are active or not, that is a political act, as you mentioned earlier. And so there's no way you kind of get out of that obligation. So next slide. So our presidential candidates, as many of us know, we've often heard about the Democratic or the Republican candidates, but there are other candidates on the Maryland ballot specifically. So for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And for the Republican Party, Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Now for the Green Party, it will be Jill Stein and Butch Ware. And for the Libertarian Party, Chase Oliver and Mike Termat. I apologize if I said your name incorrectly, Mike. I'm not certain of that pronunciation. And then unaffiliated, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Nicole Shanahan. Any questions about these candidates or any information about who's on the ballot? Okay. Yes, ma'am. Does she need a... Sure. Mm-hmm.
before she asks her question, I just want to remind everyone of the rules in that we cannot ask for specific information, whether we should support a candidate or not. So bear that in mind as you're asking your questions.
And
Thanks.
I'm not going to do that, Sora, but thanks. My concern is really about those persons who don't look at voting as seriously as maybe some of us here do. And the concern is about the list of candidates. As you mentioned, the Green Party and others who are what we would call quote unquote independents. My concern is the lack of knowledge or the comfort level of persons who don't understand what it means to have all of the various candidates listed and the impact of what they may do on the outcome of whomever it is who is running for the top position. And I guess where I'm going with this is there a way that, for example, a Green Party candidate, that information can also be imparted on the ballot in terms of what that means as far as a Green Party? What is that? And it can't just be something that, you know, somebody wrote in, and in some cases they may have heard the name before, and they just say, oh, yeah, I'm gonna vote for that person. And the outcome is that they probably didn't mean that. And so with that variety, is there a way that information can be imparted on those candidates as we know about the two major parties?
I want to make sure I'm understanding your question correctly. Are you asking if our ballots themselves can speak to kind of what those parties are?
Correct.
I doubt that that would probably be permitted, mainly because we really don't describe any party on a ballot. We just happen to be more aware of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But I do think it's maybe an opportunity for organizations like yours here to not necessarily, again, tell people how to vote, but I think a lot of times people don't know what the origins of these parties are. Like, even if you were simply to have like a party 101 conversation, like this party was established this year by this person, this part, you know, it's not really telling you how to embrace or not embrace those parties, but I do believe that a lot of people do not know the history of these parties, and that's probably fair to have like a party 101 type of, you know, that'd probably be consistent with your charge and not in conflict, because it's true. I think most people are mainly aware of the two primary parties, and I think sometimes people don't even know that just because someone's on your Maryland ballot does not mean they're on another state's ballot. So, for example, you do have a candidate that's unaffiliated on the ballot here in Maryland that is not present on all 49 other states' ballots. And those are things that are, I think, that's something that's permissible to discuss, because I think many people would be probably surprised to find out that someone could be a candidate for president and on their state's ballot and not on another state's ballot. I think most people would find that surprising. Of course. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. Okay, so for U.S. Senate, we currently have one of our two U.S. Senate offices up in this cycle because there's a retirement of Senator Cardin. And so with that retirement, this is the opening. And so for the Democratic Party, we have Angela Alsobrooks. For the Republican Party, we have Larry Hogan. And for the Libertarian Party, we have Mike Scott. So as you see, we do not have a candidate from the Green Party, for example, for U.S. Senate, or any unaffiliated candidates. Any questions about that? Okay, great. Next slide. And for the House of Representatives, Baltimore County has a little bit of a few different congressional districts. In Congressional District 1, for the Democratic Party, we have Blaine Miller III. We have Republican Andy Harris and Libertarian Joshua O'Brien. For Congressional District 2, for the Democratic Party, I'm just going to say Johnny O. Ochevsky, I think I can say it, but you know, I just rather not butcher it. For Republican Party, we have Kim Klacik, and then for Libertarian Party, we have Jason Joseph Wunder. And then for Congressional District 7, which is the one I live in and obviously is predominantly in the city, but not entirely, we have Kwesi Mfume for the Democratic Party. We have Republican Party Representative Scott Collier and Libertarian Party Representative Ronald Owens Bay. Any questions about these particular races? Yes. Honestly, there are other parties, right? So she asked, the question was, are there only 5 parties? There are a lot of different parties that don't even exist in certain states, and some parties have different names. So for example, I used to work for a Minnesota congressman, and the Democratic Party in Minnesota is not called the Democratic Party. It's called the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, or the DFL. So that's the formal name of it, is that. But they are associated as the Democratic Party, but they have a specific name in Minnesota that is the DFL. So there's the Working Families Party. I know people have heard it and probably thought it wasn't real, but there are people that run as members of the Working Family Party in other states. So depending where you live, there might be, I wouldn't be surprised if California has a lot more different parties because it's a really big state, right? It doesn't mean that they are active at the statewide level, but they could, you know, have activity at the local level. So it's as many parties as Americans would like to have them, honestly. It's just that I think historically, Americans have not gravitated beyond 2 primary parties. Other countries sometimes have many different parties and have a parliamentary system where their style of government is just a little bit different. Their leaders are not elected by the people directly, like the prime minister is elected by the members of the parliament. Mm-hmm. In England or the UK. Any other questions? Okay, next slide. And this is for the Maryland Supreme Court. Has a new name. And so for the Second Circuit, we have Angela Eves. For the Appellate Court of Maryland Second Circuit, Douglas Nazarian. And for the Appellate Court of Maryland at Large, Andrea Lay. Appellate Court of Maryland at Large, Kevin Arthur. And Appellate Court of Maryland at Large, Ann Corbel Albright. And as Lisa mentioned earlier, quite often when you see judges on the ballot, there's no one running against them. Next slide. Oh gosh, let me pull up my phone. It's a little small for me. I used to have really good vision, 20/20 vision, and it's still pretty good. I think it's like 20/25, but you know, things are changing. Yeah, it's only going down. So my eyes didn't go away on my 40th birthday, but I twisted my ankle at my birthday party. So I was like, welcome to 40, in a boot. I thought that was like hysterical. So on the ballot, for a statewide ballot measure, I want to bring your attention to question 1. And so this is a declaration, the title of this ballot measure is a Declaration of Rights, or Right to Reproductive Freedom. And so I will read it here. The proposed amendment confirms an individual's fundamental right to an individual's own reproductive liberty and provides the state may not directly or indirectly deny, burden, or abridge the right unless justified by a compelling interest achieved by the least restrictive means. And that's adding Article 48 to the Maryland Declaration of Rights. And so the options that you have before you are either to vote in support of adding this amendment, voting yes. That if you vote yes for what I just read, that vote supports adding a new article to the Maryland Constitution's Declaration of Rights, establishing a right to reproductive freedom defined to include the ability to make and effectuate decisions to prevent, continue, or end one's own pregnancy. Or you can endeavor to vote against this constitutional amendment, which means you oppose amending the state constitution to establish a right to reproductive freedom. So that is all written in the appropriate legalese needed to meet legal sufficiency. I do believe that the explanations of what a yes or no vote probably clarify in case it was a bit unclear. But for those who might need even additional understanding, this ballot measure is essentially asking to codify the rights that were conferred in Roe v. Wade but overturned by the Dobbs decision in our Maryland state constitution. So that is the question that is being made for you. Yes? Oh, yeah, good turn.
Good morning. So just wanted to confirm, the language that it says for and it explains what for is and against is explicitly on the ballot, so that way people are.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And as she stated earlier, this is a good place for when you do those QR codes that vote 411 or that vote.org,
Yep.
They usually will break down measures for you. So this is a lot of, it sounds like mumbo jumbo, right? You have to really read it and make sure you understand. There are sites, the Baltimore Banner is another one that will actually put the issues and they will break it down into plain language for you to be sure that you understand exactly what it is. And I would think it's a good idea where it'll have that yes and no under the bullets won't be there. It'll just say for or against. It'll be a good idea to share with people to understand for means a yes, because sometimes it could be written backwards and you're thinking when you're saying for, it's actually against. So this is the importance of preparing yourselves and knowing that what, in some instances, when you read it correctly, what the for and the against stands for, so you're not voting the opposite. So just share that with your neighbors and friends.
I'm going to give you a little secret. Octavia is a licensed attorney, so am I. One of the secrets to reading legally language is to read it backwards. So she's correct. When you read it backwards, if I say yes, that means I'm for, and then go up and read. If I say no, that means I'm against, and then go up and read what you're against. Okay? Secret.
My question is about clarifying what is meant in that clause, least restrictive means. What does that mean? What might be an example? And that, for me as a voter, would kind of be.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
That's something that.
Oh, no, just into the
Okay,
mic.
that's something that I am a little disturbed by, not knowing what that means. Least restrictive means.
So it's not designed to actually limit you. It's, I think, just a clause, quite frankly, because you want to always have the broadest umbrella of possibilities reserved for the state, because there might be actions that are compelling, can be constitutionally defended about any limitation on something, which is, I know sometimes people feel like, shouldn't this mean that there's no limit? We never know when the state might need to reserve, or the government might need to reserve in a constitutional manner, access to something. There's a reason why we can't say everything we want to say. There's a reason why we can't do everything we want to do, because sometimes it might not be in the best interest of the public. But quite frankly, that's kind of boilerplate language. It's not to in any way infringe upon the right it's trying to confer here. This is really to ensconce and to protect, reproductive health access, and essentially ensure that we don't have to worry about in the future someone just trying to put forth a law to limit that access in the General Assembly, because that would be in conflict with the state's constitution. Because right now, many people see Maryland as a state of safety for those seeking those services, but I think many people realize things that you've taken for granted can change on a dime. I mean, even the Voting Rights Act itself, a grand achievement of the civil rights movement, is in many ways a shell of its former self, right? And so this is, I think, an opportunity for those who agree with the ballot measure to ensure that the status quo is maintained. It really doesn't change anything.
I'm thinking about, in the case of free speech, you cannot yell fire in a crowded place. So is there an example that could be shared? I'm just thinking if someone asked me, if someone in my family asked me, so what does that entail? Is there just one example that could be cited?
I'm trying to think if it was something probably related to a child or an underage party. There's generally some level of limitation on access to certain procedures and so forth. There can be a compelling state interest in limiting access to certain medical procedures, for example, without the consent of a parent. Like, those are the types of laws that are generally deemed, you know, kind of a permissible action, but a limitation on something that would otherwise be accessible.
If I can interject, I'm going to just give you an example. This has nothing to do with voting, but least restrictive environment, one way that is very clear to me. I used to work in the arena of defending public school systems regarding special education services. There is always repeated in special education law the least restrictive environment. Basically what that means is you want a child with special needs to be educated in an environment that is as embracing of the general population as everyone else. So if that helps you to understand what least restrictive environment means, that's an example. And we can move back into the conversation about voting.
Any other questions on the ballot measure? Thank you so much. Next slide. So, as we mentioned before, your deadline for largely registering is October 15th, but we want to remind people about how you actually cast your vote. So your absentee or mail-in voting, any registered voter is eligible to vote by mail, and that's really important. I know that there's been a lot of media conversation about the the value of it. Is it permissible? Is it as safe? Is it as valid a form of voting? And I just want to assure you that mail-in voting is a valid and accessible opportunity for voting here in Maryland and across this country. Early voting. Any registered voter has an opportunity to vote early and in person. I can say over the past several cycles, early voting has definitely plummeted. Many people are voting by mail and by drop box. So I'm telling you, if you are one of those people that really likes voting in person, you could probably get in and out of there pretty quickly, because most people are kind of shifting from early voters to mail-in and drop box voters. In-person voting at your designating polling place on November 5th is obviously always available. But something to remind voters is that early voting is very unlikely to occur at the place that you would vote at on November 5th. That could be sometimes a point of confusion, and I forgot to mention that earlier. So every county has generally some assigned early voting areas. They're generally trying to create some geographic access, so they try to spread that out. The good thing to know is, let's say there is an early voting center, but it's near your job, but not near your house. You can vote at any early voting center. So that's another point of convenience in your county here in Maryland, just to share, because that can sometimes be more convenient for you, quite frankly, to do it on your way to work versus sometimes a place near your home. Now, provisional ballots. Now, sometimes there can be a situation where you've requested things in your perspective in due order. You have not received them. You show up. And because of either inconsistency with the information in the system, perhaps you're at a place that you believe is the right place to vote, but things are saying otherwise, you may be granted an opportunity to vote a provisional ballot that can be cured later should it be necessary to become a formal vote. But what I really want to emphasize is, if you're voting on November 5th and you end up in line at a time where the precinct and the polling place is about to close, do not get out of that line. As long as you arrived at the time that the polling place was open, you have a right to vote there. Just stay in line. Do not get out of line, because sometimes you have machines that are malfunctioning. They're running out of paper ballots. There could be something that needs to be remedied. And as long as you remain in line, it doesn't matter that the poll has technically closed, because it's not closing until it's serviced the last person in line to vote. But during a situation like that, there may be a reason for provisional ballots to be provided because of some challenge happening in that voting center. Please do not go away and not vote at all because your only opportunity to vote is provisionally, because there could be a curing of that ballot later as they are, certifying all the results, where your vote, which began as provisional, may eventually become an important real vote that is tabulated. And so, I can just tell my little story. I'm one of those down ballot, candidate races. I was so happy to hear y'all say it was important to vote down there, because that's where I am, down there. And I remember that in the 2022 race, that there was, the law was not in effect to essentially allow the polling places to count early votes and mail-ins and drop boxes in real time. So there was a lag. And so for me, it looked like I was in 4th place, I think at the end of early voting, but I knew all my votes were mail-in votes and drop box votes, so I wasn't really bothered by that. And so on election day, I came in number 2, and the top 3 become, delegates. And so it really took until about a week and a half later, when they finally were counting all of the mail-ins and sometimes even provisional, that I ended up winning my election. But it looked like I was out of it at the beginning, but I already knew that people were voting differently, and so that means election day really isn't election day. It's just the last day you can vote. Because election day is kind of already happening so much earlier these days. It's happening weeks earlier. So election day, it's election days, it's election time. It's not really election day, because people are, I think my mom already put her thing in the mail. You know what I mean? So people are already, doing these things, and I think some of our community and civic organizations are going to have to adjust their strategies because of the fact that people are really voting so much earlier than historically. Next slide. So voter protection. I love that. See something, say something. I'm going to tell you, I often did voter protection, nonpartisan and partisan, sometimes voter protection in 2008, 2012, 2016, and I have seen some things. And I remember I was in Virginia, I was in Richmond, Virginia, and the polling place was a high school, which is a very common polling place. And there was a bus stop directly across the street from the high school. And all of a sudden, this city worker comes up and is like, I'm closing the bus stop. I'm like, what? I mean, how are people supposed to get here? I was like, who told you? Oh, somebody told him to do it. I realized this is the low man on the totem pole. He's just doing what someone told him. So we go in and we tell, the election, judges and other folks that, this is going to maybe impede people's ability to access this polling place. And then I realized that the sitting mayor of Richmond was on the ballot. So then I was like, well, we need to contact his people, because this is obviously, and then around the corner, all of a sudden they were trying to close the street leading up to the school down for road work for 8 hours. None of it seemed like an urgent matter. And so again, we stopped the road closure, we restored the bus stop, but these are the kinds of things that are happening. They're not really things happening in the polling place. It's generally happening around the polling place. And I remember this person was claiming that we couldn't do certain things that I knew were permissible, and I had the Virginia election code with me, and I'm like, well, can you show me where that's at? And then the guy just smiled and walked away, because sometimes people are giving people misinformation. They're sending out robocalls telling people to go vote on the wrong days. There's a lot of things that, there's a lot of trickery that's happening, and it's really important to, if you see anything that's wrong, to call numbers like 1-866-OUR-VOTE. I know during the 2020 elections, I was one of the people on that particular service, that I was receiving calls from North Carolina of people that were having trouble getting to the polling place, or were being told that they couldn't vote somewhere. And so this is just really important work, because they can't know about the inconsistencies and the irregularities if there's not someone reporting it. So please report to election protection hotlines like this, and also to the Board of Elections in your county or jurisdiction if there is something going wrong. Yes, questions?
Can you address when you're in the polling place as far as marking on your ballots, that if there's any marks on your ballots, they're invalid? Can you address that? Because that has been shared to many people, and I want you to be specific about how that
So the
works.
question was about if there's kind of errant marks on your Scantron, for lack of a better term, your ballot, how that could in some ways unintentionally corrupt the processing of your ballot. That is a possibility. I just think that people need to be really, really careful when they're circling things in because quite frankly, we're not doing things by hand. We are processing more efficiently with technology, so ensure that you're not making any additional marks outside of the actual circle that you're endeavoring to make a selection about. That's really an important reminder to be as neat as possible in filling out your ballot. And you also don't want to have more than one selection in a particular candidate race where there's only one selection that is permissible. Like, for example, obviously, there's certain races where you can choose up to a certain amount of people, and in that case, it's permissible to have more than one circle filled in. But you do not. You want to be careful that you didn't accidentally circle in more than one for one person race, because that could also corrupt your ballot. I'm sorry.
What I was talking about, if you receive your ballot and someone that you get your ballot from puts a mark on your ballot for some reason, is that something that we should be aware of?
I'm not aware of that happening. I'm not saying it hasn't, but I personally don't have an awareness of like an election official, or anyone making, any marks for someone else or even by accident, but they should not be. They absolutely should not be making any marks on your ballot.
No, and I was just going to say, so election judges should, if you get it, definitely give it a once over and see. But when you cast your vote and you put it in the machine, you stay there. Because if there's anything that won't allow it to go through, don't just hand them your ballot and say, okay, I'm done. Because first of all, I want my sticker, so I'm going to get my sticker. But when you enter into the machine, stay there. Because if it spits it back out, then it will let you know, and you can ask, is everything okay? Is my ballot? And they're to tell you you're good or you're not. So if there is a mark, there's something that you should be able to see. So definitely look at it before you even go to your booth. But after that, stay with your ballot until it's counted and it's in the machine and it does not come back out.
That is important. Octavia, you can say that 35 times because I'm one of those people that I need to see it. I need to see it go in. I need
And that's your
everything
right
approved.
to stay. You're right.
Yes.
They can't tell you, okay, I don't care how crowded
can't
it
usher
is.
you out.
I don't care how long the line is. You stay until your ballot is in the ballot polling booth box
Right. That's right.
thing.
That's right. Yes, sir.
Yes, two things. Just to confirm that, thank you, that for early voting in the state of Maryland, I may only vote in my county.
Yes.
Okay. The other thing is I'm in line and I'm thirsty. Am I allowed to drink water? I'm tired. Do I have my fold-up seat? Am I allowed to sit down?
Yes. We are not one of those states that are making it more challenging for you to be comfortable as you wait. The goal is obviously to not have a line at all by moving briskly and efficiently, but should someone need to have a folding chair, should they need water, quite frankly, I don't think anyone could stop you from having a chicken box as long as you weren't bringing it into that. I'm just saying, it's not illegal for you to eat a snack, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's totally permissible in Maryland to do that.
And okay, so if someone does say something to me, then I should go to the voting judge or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, excuse me. Yes.
Or in line, you can call that number.
That's true.
In line, if it's a long line and you don't want to wait on somebody telling you have to move out the line, you say, okay, you call the number because that gives you the legal defense fund there on the other end, and they can make injunctions to do whatever they need to do on the spot in the moment. So stand there, you don't have to get combative, but you can call that number. If you're by yourself, you don't want to step out of line and go inside to an election judge, call the number. 1-866 our vote.
And just as a practical matter, there are always going to be volunteers from campaigns outside, and it's in their vested interest that you vote, quite frankly. So sometimes they have people that can go back and forth and make communications on your behalf so that you don't have to get out of line at all. But, just wanted to put it out there. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, poll watchers in terms of election protection. Yes, poll watchers.
Yes, thank you. Is this number the only measure we have for voter intimidation? Or do you guys have written things that we can hand out and prepare our church members for?
So this number is just a national number, so that goes for everything. But on hand, no, we do not. But you can always, on that, you can call the Baltimore Board of Elections, Baltimore County Board of Elections. And honestly, you can Google like what numbers for protection. So on hand, we don't have other numbers, but this is a national number that they are staffed and ready that you can call anytime, especially on election day, for sure.
If I can interject real quick. So earlier in the presentation, there was a QR code that we had you all go to. It gives you lots of information. Included in that is a link that'll give you specific information about voter protection, which is what you're asking about. And also, so that you all will know, there are handout materials that we have here that provide information not only about voter protection, but also it will reiterate those deadlines that have been discussed by Delegate Smith and other matters related to voting. So that information is available. But again, if you use the QR code, it'll take you to a site where you put in your address, your name and address, and it'll give you specific information, including there's a link that can take you to specific resources for voter protection, which is what you're asking about. We'll make that available.
And I do want to mention that, because I generally would do election protection with the Lawyers Committee, is that in many ways, I think this is the best first step, because unless you're at a premier precinct, there's only so many resources, right? And so to have an election protection person standing at your precinct, in addition, various, particularly presidential campaigns, also have election protection. So you have partisan election protection and you have nonpartisan election protection, but they're not all going to be present at every single polling precinct. So if they're not there, I would always say this should be your first line of defense, because they have something called basically a boiler room for every state. And so whatever state I or someone like me is, kind of working in, there is an expert in election law for that particular state that is triaging all of these issues. And so I'll be frank, sometime as a member of the public, it may not even be safe for you to be taking direct action against someone that you believe is intimidating you or another voter. It might be best to immediately alert the election protection staff so that they can get officials involved, and if it's necessary, even compel authorities to be present, because we don't necessarily want you all to be in an unnecessarily adversarial posture with people. We don't know how people are doing. Some people are not doing well, and they don't always look like they're not doing well, right? And so we can't always judge a book by its cover, and we're in a sensitive time.
And just really quickly, I know there was a question about the slides, but just a reminder that this is streaming on the church's Facebook and YouTube pages, and also on Baltimore County Alumni Chapter DST. So you can go back and watch. You can share it with friends. Please share it with friends, because there's a lot of good information that's been given today that a lot of people have not known, and that it's a good way to get the information out. And so that's one thing you can do. We said there's one thing everyone can do in this election season. So maybe your one thing is just simply sharing this post and this presentation. So you never know who's going to watch it. You don't know what's going to, and this may be the thing that might tell somebody, okay, my vote does count. So we're asking you to please share it from either our social media platforms or the churches.
Very good. Next slide. Okay, so we're doing a participant pulse check. I think you guys already aced this quiz earlier, but we'll just reiterate that down ballot issues are state and local issues that affect the jurisdictions in which we live. I also want to mention that whether it's the president, the governor, or the county executive, or in my case, the mayor, the executive branch has an opportunity, an obligation, quite frankly, to appoint people to various boards and commissions that also have a lot of say over your life. And so, for example, I forgot to mention that, the Maryland General Assembly is not a full-time body. There's only 5 states that have full-time legislatures. So most of us have another job. So in my day job, I'm assistant director for the Department of Planning for the city of Baltimore. And so, for example, in that situation, the mayor is appointing most of the people on the planning commission. Similar to the county, it would be a function. So when you're thinking about who you want to serve in some of these executive roles, remember that they have nominating and appointing responsibilities. And so you'll be relying on their judgment to make decisions on a lot of different subject, matters that affect your life, whether that's land use, which is something that's affecting all of us all the time, whether we think about it or not. And oftentimes people, it's so funny when Octavia was saying that a lot of times people think the president has all this say over their life. I would say similarly, in an opposite direction, county council members and city council members are really overexposed out of context to the jurisdiction they really have. The most profound powers you have at the county council level are really land use and zoning powers. But oftentimes people talk about things that are more interesting, I think, to the public, like education, which is really much more of a state matter in many ways. That's one of the reasons why I ran for office at the state level, because it's the state constitution that confers a right for a free and access to both a free and adequate public education. Now, there's been lawsuits challenging the adequacy of that public education that's being conferred across the state, but it's the state constitution that guarantees you that right, and it's also state funding that is predominant in the funding of public education in the state. So a lot of times people are asking a local elected official that they have more access to, and they might see on the news more about things they have very little practical jurisdiction over too. So just from the opposite angle, I see that happening a lot too. Mm-hmm. Right, that's true, that's true. They're just such all-stars. I didn't even think about it the way because they had answered all the other questions correctly. But let me get back on task, Lisa. Let me get back on task. And so let's just say, our down ballot issues, are they state and local issues that affect the jurisdictions and where we live? True. True. I am required to vote down ballot for each position in the same political party. False. Exactly. You can remix it the way you need to. And in some cases, some roles aren't even partisan on the ballot themselves. Some of them don't even denote, a party identification. My ballot will be invalidated or disqualified if I do not vote for every position. False. I can tell you for certain when I was working, I was in York, Pennsylvania for 2016 presidential election, and at the end of the day when we were getting the results for the poll, for the precinct rather, I immediately knew where we were going because about 130 people did not vote for president at all. So I was like, okay, I see what's happening here. Number 4. Ballot questions may include charter amendments. True. I don't think there are a ton maybe this year in the county. It varies, what that can look like. But I do want to at least invoke here when Lisa was mentioning, oftentimes you're asked about bonding authority around various issues. One of the things that sometimes isn't considered, if your jurisdiction is under a federal consent decree to do something, like for example, let's say your stormwater or your water system, your water infrastructure is in conflict with the Clean Water Act, and now the federal government has said you need to make these changes. Whether you guys vote for the bonding for that or not does not remove the obligation for the county to fix it. So either you get the bonding to pay for it or you take away from other services you already have. So just another consideration to make. It's not just about the taxation responsibilities of the future. It could be you have to do this whether you want to make provision to fund it from a new revenue source or if you want to take it from your existing general fund. Just a consideration. Voters can significantly impact local government's ability to provide clean air, fix potholes, and decide bond issues. True or false? True. Voting to bond issues will not impact school improvement projects in my jurisdiction. False. And so I think that's it, right? Yeah, that's the only, I think, okay.
If I can interject.
Absolutely.
So there's something that we haven't discussed at all today, and I'm going to put this out there for you to expound on a bit. Where persons who were incarcerated have been released, are they able to vote? And let me ask another question. If a person has been charged with a crime, is awaiting trial, are they able to vote?
Yes and yes. You can vote. Now, one of the things that I know there's been some work on in Annapolis, but it hasn't, I think, come completely to fruition, is providing opportunities for people to just physically vote in jail in a more clear way, like even having ballot drop boxes, because now things are just, they've changed so much since COVID. You know, it's so much easier. So I think it's important for people to know that if you are a returned citizen, that means you can vote in your community, and that's something that we want you to do. And I know that Out for Justice, which is an advocacy group that works on reconnecting returned citizens to employment, housing, and quite frankly, to their humanity and community, they see voting as one of the first steps to making someone feel a part of the stake of their family, because quite frankly, many of our incarcerated brothers and sisters have families, have children even, and they want to have a say in the futures of their family members. And in many ways, the denial in the past of those opportunities has made some people want to do something more than when they wanted to do it sometimes before they even had the access abridged in some way. But I do want to mention that if you are awaiting some type of processing, you have not been convicted, you have not lost any rights to anything. You should avail yourself of the ballot. Yes, sir. I speak, it might be off.
As a convicted felon, am on parole or probation, am I allowed to vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I may have to turn it on.
So as a returned citizen, do I have to register to vote again?
Yes, you do. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, that's right. I apologize. The question was, as a returned citizen, do I need to register to vote again? If you had registered prior to your incarceration and now you are, you're probably living in a different place, you're going to have to refresh that. And I think it's important for people to know that that's incredibly important. Once you come home, you can register, and you can register online, you can register by mail, you can register in person, and same day at the precinct. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am. It's okay.
Because we're streaming, and because this is everywhere.
Yes.
Can we just clarify the registration in person? Because while that is applicable in Maryland, I know that it's not applicable everywhere.
That's
and so
fair.
just wanting to reiterate, you might be in Georgia watching this, you might be in California watching this, you might be in Maine, that it's important that you check your state and what the regulations are, where you physically are. I think that so much has happened to confuse people on purpose that it is, especially as we, in our community, and I don't mean the church community, and I don't mean the community of Delta Sigma Theta, I mean the Black community. So much has been done to, for lack of a better way to say it, trick our people. And there's probably few of us in this room and streaming online that don't have a loved one that has been involved, engaged in some way in the legal system. And to cause our people to think that because you were convicted of whatever, that you are exempt from the process. I just want to make sure that we're crystal clear on that matter. Thanks.
First of all, thank you for saying that. Again, I want to make it clear, in Maryland, you do have your voting rights restored, and if you're watching from somewhere else, you might need to check. So go to vote.org and check the eligibility for you to vote and to check your registration status. I know many of us have friends and family across this country that don't have the same rights, maybe under the color of law that we have in Maryland. And so there's some things that we should be grateful for because it expands access and it expands the flexibilities around voting that aren't always accessible. So I think it's a sober reminder that there are some advantages we enjoy that not every state enjoys in terms of accessing their voting rights.
And just as a note, that QR code is national. So although we're using it for our purposes, if anybody puts in their address and zip code, it'll bring up the information specific to them. So you can share that QR code anywhere with anyone. It'll bring up their specific information.
Awesome. Well, I thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. If there's any kind of freewheeling conversation, I'm happy to stay here and answer any questions, or just if there's information you want to share for the greater good of those that are assembled here or watching on streaming, I feel this is the appropriate time. And so, Octavia, should I give the floor to you?
So can we please give her a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I trust and I pray that we're leaving here with something new. I hope we didn't just hear something that we've all known. I know I've learned some things. So if there's any further questions that we can answer at this moment, and I say can answer providing that we are nonpartisan, but if there are any general questions about the booth, about anything, please, we'll try to take those now.
So do we have the list of the other items that are on the ballot that we can possibly make sure people are aware of?
So for Baltimore County, those are the issues. That's all we have. That's it. So there was a congressional districts, there was president, and then there was so far the judges, and then there was just for so far as a Ballotopedia, which is another good site, ballotopedia.org. Those are so far the only issues right now that we have in Baltimore County.
Good morning, everyone, or almost afternoon. I just want to make, it's no questions, 2 comments. I have gone out to register people to vote, and I'm so happy. You have to meet people where they are. And I was so excited yesterday. I went to the recycling dump on Sisson Street, and every time I go there, I ask the young men. So yesterday, one of them said, no, I'm not registered. So I registered him. So now this weekend, I'm going to get the squeegee boys on MLK and see who's registered. But 2 things. I've been at Coppin State, and I want to encourage us to encourage our college students to have their plan. So many of them do not know how they're going to vote. When I was at Coppin, several students I approached said they didn't live in Maryland. I said, well, do you have absentee ballot, or have you requested to do a mail-in? They had no plan. So we really got to reach out to the college students to make sure that they have a plan. They're not going to have money to come home that day probably, so they got to have an advanced plan. The other point I want to make is I am a senior citizen, a proud Delta Deer, and many of my peers do not like QR codes. So we need to meet them where they are, and I refer people, especially at my church, to a simple website, iwillvote.com, and it has everything just like what's on the QR code. So we'll eventually, I'm doing QR codes right now, but eventually it takes you a while to get to the QR code status in life.
I thank you for that feedback. But the QR code did just take you to a website, just as the one that you mentioned. It was just an easy way for us. But that is a good point to take. And if we need to give anyone who had trouble with the QR code, or you want the direct link to those websites, please pull one of us aside and we will make sure that you get that information before you leave. Now, as far as the question about what's on the ballot, I haven't honestly received my sample ballot yet. So I went to Ballotopedia to get the most up-to-date sample ballot that was out. And these are the issues that were there. So if there are additional issues, this is why things like this are important. So when you get that mail, that usually from Board of Elections, and we usually toss it with the junk mail, open it up, and it's your sample ballot, and you can take that with you into the polls. So if there's anything on the ballot that you don't understand, that you have questions, you can find the answers and make sure you understand what's on the ballot. So admittedly, if there's other things other than those, when I made the PowerPoint, those were up to date, so I'm not sure what else is on the ballot. So that's a point for me to make sure that I have my sample ballot and I know what other issues are there. But I do know Ballotopedia and the other one, if you put in your zip code, it should have the most up-to-date of what's on your ballot. So I do apologize for that. That's a blind side.
Okay, so there is going to be, question A in Baltimore County is concerning a charter amendment to increase the county council to 9 members. So that is a yes or no question. And then one more. So question B is a charter amendment regarding the office of the Inspector General. It sounds like y'all don't have one. Hold on, you do. It amends to establish the office of the Inspector General for the purpose of which is to provide increased accountability and oversight in the operations of county government, provide the Inspector General. So I think you have an Inspector General, but this is creating an office of the Inspector General with subpoena power, set qualifications for the Inspector General, and provides for the office of the Inspector General to be funded as a separate budget entity. It provides for the office of the Inspector General to be funded as a separate budget entity. So I just wanted to clarify there. So for question C for Baltimore County, this is about your planning board and creating term limits for participation on the planning board from, I think, 3 consecutive terms. That would be the limit. And to make all appointments to the planning board subject to confirmation by the county council. What did I tell you? The most significant power county council and city council members have in the state of Maryland is land use, which is the planning board. Question D. This is about a county ordinance about refuse disposal and borrowing. So this is related to borrowing $5 million for refuse or waste disposal projects, including but not limited to construction, reconstruction, extension, acquisition, improvement, enlargement, alteration, closing and capping, repair, and modernization of county refuse disposal facilities. So this is a bond issue either for or against. Many jurisdictions across the country, quite frankly, are either seeing their landfills reach capacity, or there's concerns about what's in landfills posing health risks and ensuring that certain maintenance is done. So again, with my planning hat on in my day job, I also oversee staff that prepares the capital budget for this city, and I also sit on the capital budget committee for appropriations at the state level. These are the very unsexy things that municipalities have to think about, but they're important safety concerns, so related to landfill waste management. Question E, as in Edward, is a county ordinance related to your community college borrowing. And so the Baltimore County wants to borrow $18.5 million for community college projects, included but not limited to many of the same language I used before related to construction, repair, maintenance, et cetera, and architectural engineering, and acquisition of land as necessary, and furnishings and equipment and this is all, again, a bond issue for or against, and that's related to your community college system here. Question F is about public works borrowing for $55.44 million in public works projects, including but not limited to streets and highways, bridges, storm drainage systems. As you can probably imagine, those I know 55 million sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't for what I just said to you in terms of streets, highways, bridges, and storm drainage systems. Again, bond issue, for or against. And then, hold on, question G. Question G is another borrowing bond bill authorization for the county to borrow $8 million for the purposes of parks, preservation of greenways, including but not limited to acquisition, construction, maintenance, equipping of playgrounds, parks and community centers and recreational facilities, and all the related engineering, architectural, and other services needed, and the acquisition and maintenance of equipment as needed to perform that task. So again, for, against, bond authority for that. Question H is for school borrowing, and they're trying to get bonding authority to borrow $331 million for school buildings. So this is for capital needs. This is not for programmatic needs of your schools. This is for the physical conditions of the schools. So construction, maintenance, modernization, architectural engineering services, etc. Question I for Baltimore County is agricultural and rural land preservation borrowing, and this is authorizing the county to borrow $6 million for agricultural and rural land preservation projects, including but not limited to the purchase of land, development rights, conservation easements, and other real property approved by the county council. And I think this is the last. No, I'm fibbing, there's 3 more. Baltimore County question J is about community improvement project borrowing. And this authorizes the county to borrow $4 million for improvements that are including but not limited to the construction, renovation, extension, repair, or modernization of street curbs, gutters, water, sewer, and other utilities, sidewalk improvements, interior and rear access improvements, landscaping and lighting improvements, building and other structural improvements, and sidewalk and pedestrian system improvements. Question K is about waterway improvement programs. And so this authorizes the county to borrow $20 million for the acquisition and construction and reconstruction and repair and modernization of waterway improvement and stormwater related projects. It's including but not limited to shoreline stabilization, shore erosion control, wetland restoration, stream bank and riverbank restoration, stabilization and reconstruction, and control and monitoring of non-point pollutants, landscaping, dredging, and planting of trees and similar waterway improvement projects in both residential, rural, and commercial areas.
Delegate Smith, I'm just going to interject.
There's one more. There's only one.
One more, okay.
Yeah, and then the last one is Baltimore County question L. And this authorizes the county to borrow $130 million for public operational buildings included but not limited to general, health, police, fire, recreation, library, senior center, and jail buildings or facilities, and for necessary or desirable equipment pursuant to county charter. So you have a lot of bond questions that are related to either education, your physical environment, or government buildings to consider.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So thank you for the question. If nothing else, we know we have a lot of homework between now and the time we cast our vote. And we wanted to make sure that we provide information, but help everyone to understand that no matter how involved you already are, everybody here needs to have a plan. And if nothing else, we need to do what? Make sure we're registered, know who our representatives are, know what the issues are on the ballot, and thank you for sharing that information. If nothing else, it lets us know how much more we need to do. So thank you all for coming today. If you have questions, we're going to be here after the presentation. We want to take a moment again to just applaud and thank Delegate Smith for taking the time to be our moderator today. We again thank Reverend Dr. Marlene Mitchell for availing the Falls Road AME Church for our use today. We also want to thank the tech team, Faith, as well as Aaron or Brother for helping us out today. And again, this is just a start. This is the first time that we've had such a forum. We are learning as we go, and we want to build from here. So if you have any suggestions about what we can do to improve your understanding, not just for this general election, but Delta Sigma Theta was founded in 1913, and from the beginning, we have been involved in social action. Social action is more than just an election. It is making sure that we are informed and educating our public about the things that impact us day to day. So even after this, we need to hear from you. How can the Baltimore County Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority help you in your everyday lives? We need to hear from you. So please stay in touch with us. We can follow us on all different social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram. We probably have an X account.
There's a, I don't even know what that is, a poster riser outside. There's a QR code on the bottom. If not, I can go to each social media and show you how to get there. But there is a QR code on the bottom where you can stay in touch with all of us. And we're asking that you please, 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 it will help us a lot if you could scan this QR code. But I also have a link if you do not want to scan the QR code. But scan the QR code and please fill out this survey just to help us gauge how helpful this was to you and things we can do to improve, such as not having only QR codes in the future. So please, if everyone would fill this out, that will help us immensely and also help us to help you in the future.
And I'm gonna say one last thing that's really easy to remember. You can always email us at socialaction@bcacdeltas.org. Social action, all one word, at bcacdeltas.org. And we thank you for your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are refreshments so we've been here sitting a little bit. If you just go out of this door straight down the hall in the fellowship hall, we do have light, enough to get you to the drive-thru. Light refreshments. Thank you all so much.